Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find. Let's go. The 110 cockpit spins over the Farnborough Airshow crowd in England, September 6, 1952. The jet broke apart mid-pass, and this disaster forced major airshow safety changes. Detained pro-democracy demonstrators in Gwangju, South Korea, May 1980, are forced to stand in a line with heads down while helmeted security forces watch. A crew member climbs out of Bruce, the full-size mechanical shark built for Jaws, 1975, during a behind-the-scenes setup on a boat deck. The shark kept breaking in salt water. A dark railroad trestle over Pope Lick Creek in Louisville, Kentucky, sits at the center of the Pope Lick Goatman legend. Stories say a half-goat figure lures people onto the tracks, but the real danger is the train. The Russian submarine K-141 Kursk sits in dry dock, cut open after being raised from the Barents Sea. A chain of onboard blasts sank it in August 2000, and all 118 crew were lost. Kurdish detainees sit chained at the neck and feet in Iran under Reza Shah Pahlavi around 1930. That same year, Kurdish leader Simko Shikak was lured to a talks meeting and never returned, turning him into a warning story. A checkerboard B-24 assembly ship flies as a beacon bomber, meant to be spotted fast in dawn haze. Old bombers were stripped and painted loud so whole formations could lock in place before heading out. Objects from President Lyndon B. Johnson's pockets in 1973 include sunglasses, a comb, gum, inhaler sticks, and a cigarette pack. The small everyday kit is a strange last snapshot of a man who signed the Civil Rights Act. B-17, flying fortresses of the 306th Bomb Group, fly toward Germany in World War II. Each plane carried a 10-man crew, and these tight formations were built for long missions through brutal skies. Fidel Castro speaks at the Soviet Communist Party Congress in Moscow, February 25, 1976. Cuba depended on Soviet oil and trade, so this podium moment was also a lifeline on display. The shattered taxi on Pipersgatan in Stockholm marks the Flyborg blast, March 12, 1926. It was an insurance plot using a hidden charge, and the passenger died while the driver survived. Workers install the first Anderson air raid shelter in London, February 25, 1939. These cheap corrugated steel huts were issued to millions of families and saved lives during night raids. Albert Einstein sits on a cottage step in Nassau Point, Long Island, summer 1939, talking with David Rothman as a small child watches. Weeks later, he signed the letter urging United States leaders to take uranium research seriously. Howard Hughes, XH-17. Flying crane towers over spectators, built to lift huge loads with an oversized rotor. Only one was made, and its jet-driven rotor made a sound people said could shake the airfield. Sideshow giant Al Toomey stands outside his Florida trailer camp, dwarfing the vacancy sign. His extreme height came from a pituitary disorder, and he later worked as a firefighter and fire chief in Gibsonton. The Grand View Hotel rises over Brooklyn's Shore Road, built in 1886 as a waterfront summer resort. It lasted only a few years before a January 1893 fire erased it overnight. An Italian soldier poses beside a tiny tracked Mias Tankette prototype before World War II. Built as a one-man mini-tank, it promised armor in a small box but had almost no room to fight. A United States aircraft carrier deck tilts into Typhoon Cobra, December 1944, with planes smashed and the sea swallowing the horizon. The storm sank 3 destroyers and killed about 790 sailors, a kamikaze wind that hit without warning. Private First Class Gerald Cotton Sr., age 38, readies his gear to cross the Rohr River near Schneidhausen, Germany, February 25, 1945. He survived the war after being wounded and was home by October 1945. A German propaganda minister shakes hands with 16-year-old Willy Hubner as he receives the Iron Cross at Leoben, March 9, 1945. A roadside warning sign in County Armagh, 1994, reads "Sniper at work with an armed silhouette." It came during the Troubles, when even a quiet country road could feel like a trap. A Woman Drives the Dynasphere, a one-wheel car prototype, in 1931. It could reach about 30 miles per hour, but turning and stopping were so awkward that the idea vanished. Antonio Tejero speaks from the Spanish Parliament podium during the failed coup attempt of February 23, 1981. He died in February 2026, on the same day Spain released newly declassified files about that night. Visitors ride the Whirl of the World at the British Empire Exhibition in London, 1924. This huge fair drew millions to Wembley and sold a glossy vision of empire through pure entertainment. British troops crowd a destroyer as they reached over after the Dunkirk evacuation, May 1940. More than 338,000 Allied soldiers were pulled off the beaches, turning a retreat into a legend. Allied troops watch a nightclub act in Brussels, Belgium, March 26, 1945, as a performer lifts a giant snake. Days from the war's end in Europe, the room looks calm, but everyone knows the front is still close. A flooded machine hall inside a massive abandoned United States power plant sits silent, with rusted pipes and turbines half submerged. Once it fed a city with electricity, now the water turns every step into a hidden risk. Cassius Clay shocks the boxing world by beating Sonny Liston to win the heavyweight title, February 25, 1964. He was only 22, and the upset instantly launched the legend, later known as Muhammad Ali. Alan Bean walks the moon during Apollo 12, November 19, 1969, laying out a cable for the lunar surface magnetometer. The instrument measured the local magnetic field, helping reveal that the moon once had a more active interior. The World Trade Center rises in New York City during construction in 1970, framed by cranes and a bold project sign. The towers used a tube wall design to stand against wind, and their footprint reshaped Lower Manhattan. Tourists stand at an ice cave mouth inside Franz Josef Glacier on New Zealand's South Island, 1959. These caves can form and vanish fast as meltwater reshapes the ice, so the entrance is never the same twice. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Franco Columbu stroll a California sidewalk in the 1970s, looking like they just walked out of a gym. Both were bodybuilding champions, and this era set up Arnold's leap from weights to Hollywood. A British serviceman holds a carrier pigeon with a message canister, July 23, 1945. Before reliable radios everywhere, these birds carried tiny notes across fire and fog, and many earned medals for it. Soviet soldiers in Stalingrad, 1940s, feed a horse pieces of captured German boots in the snow. Wartime shortages were so severe that some footwear was woven from straw, and even that could end up as animal feed. Japanese soldiers pose with captured gear after fighting at Khalkhin Gol in Mongolia, 1939. That border war ended in a major Japanese defeat, pushing Tokyo away from Siberia and toward the Pacific. A whole bull roasts on a giant spit for a New Year feast in Yorkshire, England, December 31, 1931. Crowds watched the all-day turn, a loud holiday show that fed a village at once. A trained pig sniffs for truffles in France, 1980s, with handlers watching closely. Pigs can smell truffles deep underground, but they also want to eat the prize, so the race is to grab it first. Demobilized Soviet soldiers trudge along the tracks at Brest Station, June 1956, hauling heavy suitcases home from Germany. This was the long tale of post-war occupation as thousands finally left garrisons and returned to civilian life. A hat maker's assistant stands on a top hat brim in London, 1925, to prove its strength. Good silk hats were stiffened with shellac, turning them into wearable hard shells. A Soviet Special Medical Service van on a Gaz-52 chassis waits in Dubna, near Moscow, 1970s. These vehicles collected heavily drunk people and brought them to the sobering-up station to sleep it off. A firefighter tests an early fire extinguisher as officials watch in the Russian Empire, 1909. These public trials proved the new pressure spray could beat open flames faster than buckets. An unfinished Messerschmitt P-1101 jet prototype lies in a Bavarian hangar complex found by Americans in spring 1945. Its adjustable wing angle idea lived on, helping inspire the Bell X-5 test plane. Queen Elizabeth looks at the American giant skeleton from Kentucky, measured about 232 centimeters tall, 1967. The display hints at gigantism, when a hormone disorder can make bones grow far beyond normal. Researchers unwrap Tutankhamun's mummy in the Valley of the Kings, November 11, 1925, inside a tomb turned into a lab. Over 9 days, they logged every layer and amulet, creating one of archaeology's most detailed photo records. Two stylish women fix a sports car on the roadside in the 1930s, one in heels working under the chassis. It is a sharp snapshot of early car culture when a flat tire meant doing the dirty work yourself. British troops test a crane mounted on a Matilda II tank turret designed to lift an injured crewman out fast. It was a rare life-saving idea for armored warfare, trying to rescue a trapped tanker without opening the hatch for long. A man stands on a mailbox in thick Los Angeles fog, February 4, 1953, reaching to read the Broadway street sign. The haze turns a normal corner into a ghost scene, and his quick hack becomes the whole story. A woman points to a jagged hole in a wall that hid a secret room used to shelter people in the Netherlands during World War II. The Ten Boom family built this hidden space behind a false wall, and their courage saved hundreds before betrayal brought arrests. Daredevil Jack climbs out of the East River after a Brooklyn Bridge jump, May 24, 1930. Stunts like this packed newspapers, but one mistake meant the cold current decided the ending. Civil rights marchers head to the post office in Washington, April 1964, carrying signs and walking in Sunday best. This was peak pressure season, just months before the Civil Rights Act became law. Crowds clutch bundles beside packed rail cars in wartime Europe, a station scene that feels ordinary until you look closer. In Berlin, on January 20, 1942, the Wannsee Conference tightened the rail deportation plan for Europe's Jews. An original Golden Arches McDonald's on Pennsylvania Route 18 in Beaver Falls shows the classic 1965 drive in era design. When the new Brighton Bridge area was rebuilt in the late 1980s, this roadside icon disappeared. The last 6 commercial timber rafts leave Cherry Tree, Pennsylvania in 1896, with men balancing on lashed logs. Some white pine spars ran up to 90 feet long and became masts for clipper ships sent around the world. Apollo 11's command module floats in the Pacific after splashdown, July 24, 1969, as recovery swimmers move in. The crew were sealed into quarantine right away because nobody knew what moon dust might bring back. German mountain troops pack into a Junkers Ju-52 transport on the way to Crete, May 20, 1941. Operation Mercury became the first major invasion led by airborne forces, and the losses shocked even the planners. Technicians prepare the Pioneer 3 probe to sit atop a Juno 2 rocket before its December 5, 1959 launch. A booster fault cut the moon attempt short, but the flight still measured Earth's radiation belts and fed the next probes. British troops crouch behind rubble at Arnhem's Oude and Bergstraat Junction, April 14, 1945, as smoke pours from shattered buildings. With Germany weeks from collapse, this street still forced soldiers to crawl and wait for a single clear move. A vast coalition vehicle column rolls across the desert as the ground war begins. February 24, 1991, from Saudi Arabia into Iraq. The campaign ended in about 100 hours, with Iraq losing thousands of armored vehicles. USS Enterprise CV-6 smolders after a Japanese aircraft strike on May 14, 1945, with sailors fighting fires across the flight deck. Even this legendary carrier was nearly knocked out late in the war, but her crew kept her afloat. 10-year-old Anthony King walks between two Cybermen on the Doctor Who set in London, February 25, 1967. The monsters are just actors in metal suits, but the photo still looks like a real abduction. The giant Bamiyan Buddha towers over Afghanistan in 1931, carved straight into the cliff. In 2001, it was destroyed, and a 1,400-year landmark vanished in days. Men sit in Drivo Trainer driving simulators at a California high school, 1958, steering at a road film on a screen. Aetna built these electric pods to test reaction time and basic habits before students touched a real car. British soldiers of the 55th Division line up at a dressing station in April of 1918, each gripping the man ahead after a gas attack damaged their eyes. One cloud could take a unit out without a shot, and this chain is what survival looked like. Kurds ride a truck in Sekiz, Iran, 1978, cheering the uprising against the Shah. Within a year, the new rulers crushed Kurdish demands for autonomy, turning celebration into bitter regret. Gus Grissom climbs into the Mercury capsule Liberty Bell 7 for his July 21, 1961 flight, helped by John Glenn. The corrugated skin was built to flex through brutal heat swings without buckling during the launch and re-entry. Ernest and Mary Hemingway sit in a Land Rover on safari in Kenya, February 1953, speaking with Maasai men. That trip ended with Hemingway surviving 2 plane crashes in 2 days, fueling the myth around him. Photographers ride to work in 1912 on a motorcycle sidecar loaded with tripods and bulky cameras. Before small film cameras, every shot meant hauling a rolling studio through the streets. Miss France poses on a beach in 1920, wearing a simple one-piece suit and a sash. Early pageants sold a new modern image, mixing fashion, publicity, and a hint of rebellion. Fidel Castro walks a bear cub named Baikal on a leash, a gift from Siberian geologists. The cub was taken to Cuba but could not adapt to the tropical climate. A Hawaiian Airlines jet shows a huge section of roof torn away after an explosive decompression in 1988. The pilot still landed it safely, and only one flight attendant died. Pablo Picasso poses in 1908, right as he was forging the sharp, blocky style that became early Cubism. Within a year, he painted Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, the shock canvas that cracked modern art wide open. A Missouri farmhouse sits buried in ice after a snowstorm in 1897, with trees turned into glass. This is an ice storm effect, when freezing rain coats everything and can snap branches like sticks. This is not a 1914 football crowd in London. It shows detained men bent forward with hands held behind their backs under helmeted guards. The wrong caption makes it feel like a normal day, but the posture says control and fear. An Apache warrior poses with an Evans repeating rifle around 1880, wearing bandoliers and simple clothing. The Evans used a spiral magazine that could hold many rounds for its time, a rare edge on a harsh frontier. This is not a church in Warsaw. It shows detained men bent forward in a line under helmeted guards with rifles. The wrong caption hides the truth, but the forced posture tells you exactly what kind of day this was. Shakespeare's birthplace in Stratford-upon-Avon appears in an 1850 photograph, a timber-framed house with its street still quiet. Centuries after his death, this building became a pilgrimage site that helped invent literary tourism. The original Hollywoodland sign crowns the hills above Los Angeles, first raised in 1923 as a real estate ad. The land was later removed, and a sales gimmick became the world's movie symbol. The SS Seawise University burns in the harbor, throwing a towering smoke plume over the water. Once the world's largest ocean liner, it was gutted during a 1972 blaze and never sailed again. A Salvation Army aid truck stops beside a street ripped open by the Johnstown flood, downtown Johnstown, 1977. Torrential rain overwhelmed the region and turned roads into raw channels in minutes. A Heinkel. He-111 skids across a German field on its belly near Jüterbog, April 8, 1945, leaving a long scar behind it. The photo was taken from above just after it was shot down, freezing the exact second the war caught up. Two men shovel mud from Penn Traffic's windows in downtown Johnstown after the July 1977 flood. A stalled storm dumped about 12 inches in one day, dam failures followed, and the store never reopened. East and West Berlin residents speak through open windows across the new Berlin Wall in 1961. Within days, the street was sealed with bricks and fences, turning neighbors into distant silhouettes overnight. Hundreds of parachutes filled the Dutch sky during Operation Market Garden in 1944, one of the largest daylight airborne drops ever. The plan was to seize a chain of bridges for a fast push into Germany, but the final bridge at Arnhem was not held. A woman peers through a narrow gap in the Berlin Wall, a quiet snapshot of Europe being split in two. The phrase "Iron Curtain" comes from a theater fire curtain and appears in writing as early as 1904, before Churchill made it famous in 1946. 3 cars are stacked like toys at Main and Market in downtown Johnstown after the July 1977 flood. A stalled storm dumped about 12 inches in one day, and the surge shoved vehicles into piles across the streets. 2 United States Marines stand on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima on February 25, 1945, 2 days after the famous flag raising. The 48-star flag was later preserved by the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Crowds lined the decks of RMS Olympic at Southampton on April 24, 1912, days after Titanic went down. Olympic was Titanic's near twin, and her early voyages carried extra lifeboats, new drills, and a scared silence no poster could hide. In 1956, volunteers sit in separate booths, wearing clear masks, as researchers test which parts of car exhaust sting the eyes in smog. They were kept apart and not told if they breathed polluted air or clean air, so the reactions stayed real. Hotel Rossiya in Moscow stands scarred after the February 25, 1977 emergency that started on several floors at once. With truck ladders reaching only 7 floors, crews tied light ladders into a chain up to the 22nd floor and brought down over 1,000 people. Workers clear flood wreckage off Pennsylvania Railroad tracks beside the Conemaugh River in Johnstown after the July 1977 disaster. A stalled storm dropped about 12 inches in one day, and these rails were the lifeline for hauling debris out fast. Apollo 14's Saturn V rolls to Pad A at Launch Complex 39 on November 9, 1970, riding a giant crawler transporter. In 1960, an Atomics International engineer tunes a 200-pound space reactor prototype in Canoga Park. Fueled by a uranium-zirconium hydride alloy, it reached criticality, hinting at compact power for long missions beyond sunlight. Sailors balance on the wet deck of submarine U-107 as it links up with a supply ship in the South Atlantic in 1941. This mid-ocean refill kept patrols going far from any port, turning empty ocean into a hidden highway. A French landscape after the Battle of the Aisne in World War I looks like the moon, pocked with water-filled shell holes as far as you can see. What used to be fields and trees was erased into a maze of craters, where even the horizon feels silent and wrong. Private First Class John Carter from Dallas nails up a sign after his unit captured Bâle, Germany, on February 25, 1945. He survived the war and later became a commercial artist, honored as State Artist of Texas in 1981 to 1982. A Banff strike wing mosquito attacks a 7-ship convoy in the Kattegat on April 5, 1945, sending spray and smoke across the sea. The strike sank an escort ship and a trawler, but one mosquito clipped a mast. French knife grinders around 1900 work, lying down beside foot-powered grinding wheels, turning street repair into an endurance job. The constant bent posture wrecked backs and lungs, so many worked flat just to last the day. A long column of surrendered German soldiers marches past the shattered Brandenburg Gate in Berlin in 1945. The wrecked barrels and rubble in the foreground show how the city looked when the war's last days finally broke it open. Neil Armstrong sits suited up for Gemini 8 in 1966, minutes before a mission that made history. He completed the first space docking, then survived a sudden spin by re-entry after only 10 hours. Walter Nilsson rides his one-wheel monowheel in 1935, a motor and seat trapped inside a giant rolling ring. Next to it, a penny farthing looks normal, which tells you how wild this backyard future really was. Two young Jewish girls wait in Munich on November 11, 1942, marked with a star and packed for a forced transport. Almost 1,000 people on their train later disappeared after arrival in Lithuania. W. Tickner Fish and Poultry in Derby, 1912, turns its storefront into a wall of hanging birds to shout "fresh" from across the street. The delivery bikes out front show how food moved fast before refrigerators. Captured German soldiers shuffle through a ruined Berlin street as a heap of discarded helmets spills across the pavement. The city's last days left entire blocks smashed and silent, with surrender lines stretching past the rubble. Soldiers pause in the smoke of Stalingrad in 1942, faces gray from dust and exhaustion. The battle turned the city into block-by-block ruins and became one of the war's biggest turning points. Robert Wadlow, 8 feet 11.1 inches tall, greets Mary Pickford as she steps off a plane in St. Louis in 1938. His height came from an overactive pituitary gland, and he is still the tallest person ever reliably recorded. Smoke rises over a Serbian village near Kosovska Mitrovica in 1941 as German troops move through the wreckage. During the occupation, whole communities were punished in sudden raids, and the real reason was often a rumor whispered too late. Soviet combat engineers climb from a river wearing inflatable swim rigs, carrying rifles and paddles for a silent crossing. This kind of gear let scouts slip over water fast without boats, then vanish into the reeds before anyone noticed. Cars are jammed in muddy stacks outside the Act III diner on Market Street after the July 1977 Johnstown flood. About 12 inches of rain fell in one day, and the surge parked vehicles where people used to eat lunch. Ferenc Shalasi, the Arrow Cross leader, is escorted in Budapest in 1946 as his wartime rule reaches its final hours. After a People's Court verdict on March 12, 1946, his story ended behind prison walls. Paul Gorgulov stands under guard in Paris in 1932 after the attack that ended President Paul Doumer's life. His sentence was carried out weeks later, and even the fate of his remains became a grim footnote people still whisper about. Universal carriers from the 53rd Welsh Division roll through Gach, Germany on February 25, 1945. The lead vehicles include men of the Highland Light Infantry, with Royal Artillery units close behind as the push into Germany tightened. 19th century firefighter smoke hoods turned rescuers into human machines, with round glass eyes and a hose mouthpiece. Early designs fed cleaner air through a tube or filter, a creepy ancestor of today's breathing gear. Londoners lean in at Waterloo Station in 1936, watching a television screen like it is magic. The first regular high-definition broadcasts began that year in Britain, and a set like this could cost as much as a small car. Crowds pack the Deutsche Werke yard in Kiel as the warship Gneisenau slides into the water on December 8, 1936. She later fought in the Atlantic and was repeatedly damaged, ending the war as a wrecked hull. Giant beer kegs arrive by wagon at the Helena Brewery in Montana in 1885, built to feed booming mining camps. Before modern refrigeration, breweries relied on cold cellars and fast deliveries, so a single huge barrel could supply a whole crew. Paris fighters braced behind sandbag barricades during the August 1944 uprising, turning corners into deadly choke points. Street combat here was often measured in 10 to 30 meters, so whoever controlled the next doorway controlled the block. Apollo 14 tracks frame Big Bertha, sample 14321, collected near Cone Crater in the Fra Mauro region in 1971. It weighs about 9 kilograms, and one embedded fragment sparked a debate over whether it is ancient Earth material or just unusual moon rock. Doolittle Raider Lieutenant Robert Height is led blindfolded off a transport plane after being flown from Shanghai toward Tokyo in 1942. Of the 8 captured airmen, 3 were killed, and 1 died in captivity. Petrache Lupu of Maglavit stands before a crowd in the 1930s, the peasant who said he spoke with God. His claims drew huge pilgrimages to a tiny village, leaving one question hanging in the air: vision, faith, or something else. 2 Soviet leaders waved to crowds during a public procession in the 1960s, smiling for cameras in full ceremonial mode. In the Soviet system, these staged appearances and metal-filled uniforms were not decoration. A waitress balances a full-course tray priced at $1.28 in 1948. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $16 today, a snapshot of how far a diner dollar could stretch. Princess Fatima of Afghanistan sits for a formal portrait in 1921, wrapped in a sheer veil and heavy jewelry. That year, Afghanistan was racing to modernize after winning full independence in 1919, and royal portraits became political messages. Women orange carriers gather in Cerbère on the French-Spanish border on February 26, 1906, launching a strike that shut the rail link. They hauled 15 to 20 kilogram loads, and after 24 hours, the bosses granted the promised pay rise. A family bows heads over dinner around 1940, a quiet moment framed by simple dishes and a patterned tablecloth. In many homes, this ritual doubled as a stress valve during hard years, when one good meal could feel like winning the day. A young German prisoner sits on a church pew in Coutances, Normandy, in late July 1944, helmet beside him and eyes fixed on nothing. The city was captured during Operation Cobra, the breakout that cracked open the front and sent the retreat racing east. Dwight Eisenhower rides through a packed Boston street on the day before Election Day in 1952, waving from a flag-draped car. Hours later, he won in a landslide, ending 2 decades of Democratic control of the White House. The Schleumann closed die press towers over its operators, a 30,000-ton forging machine built during World War II. It could stamp huge aircraft parts in one squeeze, turning raw steel into shapes no small factory could dream of. A house in Skuleni, Moldova smolders in June 1941 during the opening days of Operation Barbarossa. In the first weeks, the front moved so fast that villages could burn and be abandoned before the smoke even cleared. Wounded soldiers arrive at the hospital in Kiev's Pokrovsky Monastery in 1943, guided by nuns through the courtyard. As the front swung back toward the city, monasteries and schools were turned into emergency wards in a matter of days. Buzz Aldrin checks the Apollo 11 lunar module systems in deep space, photographed by Neil Armstrong on color film during the flight to the moon. This cramped cabin became their landing craft. Actor Harry Morgan jokes with Colonel Harlan Sanders in 1967, posing as he steals chicken from the Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket. By then, Sanders was a national icon. Muhammad Ali lifts a laughing beetle during their backstage meeting in 1964, when both were exploding into global fame. The photo captures a rare crossover of sport and pop culture, taken just weeks before Ali won the world title. John Schrank, who tried to shoot Theodore Roosevelt in 1912, is pictured after his arrest. Roosevelt was hit, but still delivered his scheduled speech, and doctors later left the bullet in his chest. The M65 atomic cannon, a 280mm gun, is shown being moved on a dock in the 1950s. In May 1953, one fired an atomic shell in the Grable test, the only time an atomic artillery round was fired in a test. Richard and Maurice McDonald pose by a sign for their drive-in hamburger bar in 1948. That year, they launched their speedy service system in San Bernardino, built around a tiny menu and fast assembly line, cooking. USS Nashville, light cruiser CL-43, burns after being hit off Leyte on December 13, 1944. The strike and fires killed 133 and wounded 190. Bruce Lee poses with Wing Chun master Ip Man in Hong Kong in the 1960s. Ip Man taught Wing Chun in Hong Kong and later became widely known as Lee's teacher. Transvaal Scottish troops escort captured Rand Revolt prisoners in South Africa in 1922. The uprising began as a strike by white miners and ended after the government used troops, artillery, and aircraft to crush it. Trinidad Gutierrez and Molly Alcanto carry oil cans and lamps at the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Roundhouse in San Bernardino in March 1943. The photo was taken by Jack Delano for the Office of War Information and shows women filling jobs once held by men. A funeral cortege in Montreal in 1938 carries Arthur Ellis, a name used by Canada's official hangman. The title Arthur Ellis was an alias used by several executioners, so the real identity behind this coffin was kept hidden. Earl Campbell carries the ball for the Houston Oilers in the 1978 AFC Divisional Playoff in Foxborough, Massachusetts. He ran 27 times for 118 yards and a touchdown as Houston won 31-14. Maori men performed the fundraising dance Kikia Te Poa in 1901 to support the Second Boer War. Maori were officially barred from enlisting, so pro-British communities raised money and aid at public events instead. A young woman in Sarajevo in 1992 waits outside a funeral service, smoking with a long rifle slung over her shoulder. In that year, the city entered a long siege that lasted until 1996. Soviet soldiers opened the gate at Auschwitz in Poland during the liberation on January 27, 1945. About 7,000 people were found alive, while most prisoners had been forced away just days earlier. Finnish President Risto Ryti signs a proclamation on December 6, 1941, declaring territories lost in the Winter War back under Finland. A boy holds a stone on Leeson Street in West Belfast in 1978, photographed by Chris Steele Perkins. Behind him, a vehicle burns during street unrest in a Catholic area of Northern Ireland. Workers lift the painted bust of Queen Nefertiti after it was found at Amarna, Egypt, on December 6, 1912, in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose. The bust was taken to Germany and is now displayed in Berlin's Neues Museum. Two West German girls speak to their grandparents across a barbed wire barrier in Berlin in 1961. The barricades went up in August 1961 and soon became the Berlin Wall. A student in Little Rock, Arkansas, watches school lessons on television in September 1958 after in-person classes were halted. That year, the public high schools were closed for the entire term during the Lost Year crisis. A British paratrooper mans a belt-fed machine gun on a rocky ridge in the Radfan Mountains during the Aden emergency in May 1964. The photo was taken by Terrence Spencer and shows combat kit that included very short shorts in the Aden heat. Sergeant Herbert Lair carries the plutonium core in a shock-mounted case into the McDonald Ranch Farmhouse assembly room in 1945. The core was for the Gadget, the device tested at Trinity on July 16, 1945. J. Gresham Machen speaks at a classroom lectern in a photo dated February 25, 1926. That day, he testified against the Curtis Bill before a joint Senate and House committee, warning it would centralize education under federal control. Stalls spill onto the quayside at Paddy's Market in Newcastle upon Tyne in 1970, with blankets and clothes laid right on the pavement. The Tyne Bridge and High Level Bridge rise behind it, making this street market scene instantly Newcastle. 5 dial painters known as the Radium Girls pose in the 1920s after working with self-luminous radium paint on watch dials. Their lawsuits helped force safer factory rules and strengthened the right of workers to sue for occupational illness. Austro-Hungarian prisoners of war collect olives at Termini Imerese in Sicily during World War I. Many POWs were put to farm work far from the front to replace missing labor. Polish border guards pose with captured smugglers in Chochołów on the Polish-Czechoslovak border on April 25, 1928. The horse cart and seized goods show how contraband moved through mountain villages before modern checkpoints. Niels Bohr stands before a chalkboard of quantum equations, the Danish physicist who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1922. In 1932, the Carlsberg Foundation gave him the Carlsberg Honorary Residence in Copenhagen. Alzoria Lewis sits in a tiara and patterned outfit beside a small stove or pot, while another woman stands behind her. She appeared at Ripley's Believe It or Not and worked at the Chicago World's Fair in 1933. The Piasecki X-49 Speedhawk is a compound helicopter with small wings and a ducted pusher propulsor in the tail. Built as a research demonstrator from an SH-60 Blackhawk, it tested higher speed flight using vectored thrust. Women march through bombed-out streets in post-war Germany, holding banners that demand equal rights for women. The ruined buildings behind them date the scene to the immediate aftermath of World War II, when politics returned to the streets under occupation. USS Ranger is launched on February 25, 1933 at Newport News, Virginia. She was the first United States Navy aircraft carrier designed and built as a carrier from the keel up. The photo shows the rear crew station of a two-seat Me-262 with the radio and radar operator's seat and instrument panels. This version carried the Fuji 218 Neptune radar, used on some night fighter conversions late in World War II. Enrico Caruso was born in Naples, Italy on February 25, 1873. He became one of the first global music stars through early sound recordings and made some of the best-selling records of his era. A United States soldier in Germany in 1945 poses with a helmet, gear, and a rifle slung at his side. The overloaded webbing and mixed items show how frontline troops carried tools, rations, and personal keepsakes at the war's end. Trainees wear homemade spacesuits in Zambia during the 1960s in photos tied to Edward Makuka Nkoloso's space project. He called it the Zambia National Academy of Science, Space Research and Philosophy, and claimed it aimed for a moon mission. Che Guevara is photographed in Havana, Cuba, in 1960 at a memorial for victims of the La Cubre explosion. The image was taken by Alberto Corda and later became one of the most reproduced portraits in the world. South Korean police officer Woo Boom-kon is shown in this portrait, later linked to the Wiryong incident on April 26, 1982. 63 people died, making it one of the deadliest single-person attacks in modern South Korean history. A Garford Putilovets armored car stands beside a soldier with the name Dobrynya painted on its armor. Built on a Garford truck chassis and armed with a 76mm gun plus Maxim machine guns, it entered service in 1915. A protester holds a Romanian flag with the center cut out during the Romanian Revolution in December 1989. The missing emblem marks the removal of the Communist coat of arms, a defining symbol seen across the street protests. Slovene troops of the Austro-Hungarian army pose in Tiraspol in 1918 with 9 Schwarzlos machine guns lined in front. The flags behind them show the word Kranj, a Slovene regional name marking the unit's identity. Countess Alice de Janzé sits with a lion cub named Samson in Kenya around 1930. She was linked to the Happy Valley expatriate circle in colonial Kenya, later infamous for scandals and violent deaths. Francisco Franco was promoted to Brigadier General on February 25, 1926, at age 33. The promotion followed his service in the Rif War in Morocco, and he was among the youngest generals in Spain at the time. A Nakajima Ki 27 fighter sits on a Khalkhin Gol airfield in 1939. The battles at Khalkhin Gol were fought between Japan and the Soviet Union and ended in a major Japanese defeat. Fathers in Blandronda, South Wales, carry their babies outside on March 5, 1937. The infants are wrapped in a seal fagu, a traditional Welsh wool blanket used for keeping babies warm while being carried. Tsar Nicholas II poses with Empress Alexandra and their daughter Olga at Balmoral Castle in Scotland on September 29, 1896, during a visit to Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria was Alexandra's grandmother. Italian ground crew load bombs beside a Savoia Marchetti SM-79 in North Africa in August 1940. The SM-79 was Italy's main tri-motor bomber early in the war and was also used as a torpedo bomber later. A woman in a 1950s kitchen plugs in a countertop grill with an electric kettle and cups set beside it. Built-in wall controls and glossy cabinets show the era's push for all-electric, labor-saving home design. A B-29 lies broken after ditching in the sea on June 4, 1944, with a survivor clinging to the No. 1 engine. The aircraft from the 395th Bomb Squadron ditched after a fuel transfer system failure. John Lennon and Yoko Ono posed during their Bed-In for Peace in 1969, staged from a hotel bed with protest signs on the wall. The bed-ins were held in March in Amsterdam and in May in Montreal to promote peace to the press. Franz Reichelt wears his homemade parachute suit before jumping from the Eiffel Tower in February 1912. Cameras captured the failed test in real time, making it one of the earliest and most chilling aviation moments on film. A huge mushroom cloud rises over Hiroshima after the August 6, 1945 atomic attack, seen from an American aircraft. Shot from about 25,000 feet, it shows a city grid turning into ash under a single expanding cloud. A Japanese Army officer poses in Malaya in 1942 during Japan's rapid push through the peninsula. The note with the photo suggests he may be linked to a first independent anti-tank unit, but his name is still unknown. Edward Krebsbach, an SS camp doctor, faces the camera at Landsberg Prison in 1947, just before his court sentence was carried out. Investigators tied him to thousands of prisoner losses, making this photo feel like a calm pause before a final chapter. Dar ibn Lokman in Mansoura, Egypt, photographed in 1915, is the building locals point to as the place where King Louis IX of France was held after his defeat in 1250. American aviator Charles Lindbergh accepts the Commander's Cross from Hermann Göring in Germany in October 1938. The medal later haunted his reputation because it tied a global hero to a regime the world would soon fear. Charles Lindbergh sits in court during the 1935 trial of Bruno Richard Hauptmann, accused in the kidnapping of Lindbergh's young son. The case gripped America so hard that reporters called it the crime of the century. Captured torpedoes lie stacked at Cavite in 1942 after Japanese forces took the port. Each one is a stolen sea weapon, ready to be turned against the side that brought it there. The Alice Cooper Group poses in Topanga Canyon in 1969 beside a towering custom Sun amplifier stack. The wrecked house behind them turns the photo into a real-life stage set, like rock music moving in before the smoke even cleared. Austro-Hungarian soldiers climb a near-vertical rock face using ropes and ladders. The photo captures mountain warfare where one slip could decide a battle before it even began. The German cruiser Königsberg sits in the port of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad. This ship later became the first major warship sunk by aircraft in the First World War, a warning of how fast naval warfare was changing. The Great Andamanese population fell from about 2,000 to 6,600 people to just 90 by the 1931 census. Maurice Vidal Portman is often connected to early colonial photographs of Andamanese people from that period. The United Service Organizations was founded on February 4, 1941, to provide entertainment and support for United States troops and military families. It brought famous performers to crowded shows like this, boosting morale far from home. A Royal Romanian Air Force Messerschmitt Bf-109G sits under camouflage netting at Pepera Airfield, near Bucharest in July 1944. The netting was meant to break up the fighter's outline from the air. Comedian Bob Hope sits with war correspondent Ernie Pyle during the Second World War. Pyle reported the war to Americans while Hope performed for troops to raise morale. Marilyn Monroe performs for United States troops in Korea in February 1954, captured on Kodachrome color film. Her shows drew huge crowds and became one of the most famous morale visits of the Korean War. While we're looking at these photos, don't forget to write in the comments. Which historical shot did you like the most, and for what reason?